My name is Martin, and this story is not a work of fiction. It all began with a letter, a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, that carried the faint, unmistakable scent of dampness and time. I found it tucked away inside a heavy oak chest, a relic bequeathed to me by my grandfather. He had passed away when I was 11, a quiet, distant figure whose youth was a closed book to me. I knew him only as an old man with sad eyes and hands that trembled slightly. But that letter, that single page, changed everything I thought I knew. It was written in a frantic, spidery hand, the ink bleeding slightly into the porous paper. Greater than, do not touch Willensdorf. Forget you ever heard the name. That place was never meant to exist. Greater than A.E. Greater than... At first, I dismissed it. It felt like a fragment from a forgotten novel. He might have been reading, or perhaps a memento from a childhood game, a secret club with a dramatic name. But the word Willensdorf lodged itself in my mind like a splinter. It had a strange, guttural resonance, a name that felt both solid and unreal. I started searching. My initial online queries yielded nothing. No town, no village, no landmark by that name on any modern map of Europe. It was a ghost. Driven by a curiosity that was rapidly becoming an obsession, I delved deeper into digital archives, historical societies, and university databases. For weeks, I found nothing but dead ends. It was as if the name had been scrubbed from history. Then, I got a hit. It wasn't much, a single, digitized article from a small Swiss newspaper dated August 1952. The headline was mundane: Geological instability in the Alpine region. The article spoke of a massive landslide, a catastrophic event that had reshaped a remote valley near the French-Swiss border. It mentioned the formation of a new, deep lake where there had once been a valley. The article said the slide had resulted in the loss of a small, isolated settlement. It never named the settlement, but I knew. I felt a cold certainty creep up my spine. This was it. This was Willensdorf. I had to know more. What was this place, and why did my quiet, unassuming grandfather harbor such a dark warning about it? The letter wasn't a suggestion. It was a plea, a command born of fear. The initials, A.E., were another mystery. They didn't match anyone in my family. Who was this person, and what was their connection to my grandfather and this drowned village? The questions multiplied, each one pulling me further from my quiet life as a freelance historical researcher and deeper into the shadow of the Alps. 2 weeks later, I was there. I had driven my worn-out sedan into a small, perpetually damp village nestled in the French Alps, a place so close to the Swiss border that the architecture seemed to be in a constant, quiet argument with itself. The air was thin and sharp, smelling of pine and wet stone. The locals were a tight-lipped community, their faces weathered by the harsh mountain climate and a deep-seated suspicion of outsiders. They spoke French with a thick, guttural accent I found hard to follow. When I asked about the lake, the one the locals called Lac des Ombres, the Lake of Shadows, their eyes would flicker with something I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't hostility, but a kind of weary resignation. One of them, an old man named Jules, whom I found nursing a glass of dark liquor in the village's only tavern, watched me for a long time before speaking. His face was a road map of wrinkles, his eyes a pale, watery blue. "You are not here for the hiking," he stated, his voice a low whisper, rough like gravel. "You have the look, the one who searches." "I'm a historian," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm interested in local history, the landslide of '52. He let out a short, bitter laugh that ended in a cough. "History? You call that history? Some things are not meant for books, boy." He leaned forward, the smell of alcohol and old wool wafting from him. "If you are looking for Willensdorf, you are looking for trouble you cannot imagine. Turn around, go home. The lake keeps its secrets for a reason. It has already taken more than just houses." "But it's just an old village," I pressed, my curiosity now burning. "Flooded, yes, but—" "You do not understand," he interrupted, his grip tightening on his glass. His knuckles were white. "Some things should not be pulled from the water, because when you pull on them, they pull back." His words should have been a deterrent. They should have sent me packing back to the safety of my apartment and my dusty books. Instead, they acted as fuel. The fear in his eyes was real. This wasn't just a local legend told to spook tourists. This was something more. Something that had poisoned the memory of this place for over half a century. I didn't back down. I spent the next 2 days making arrangements, my obsession overriding the knot of anxiety in my stomach. I rented professional diving equipment from a town a few hours away, not wanting to raise more suspicion locally. Finding a guide was harder. No one wanted to go near the Lac des Ombres. They spoke of strange currents, of the disorienting cold of boats whose engines would inexplicably die in the middle of the water. Finally, I found a young man named Thibault. He was an outsider like me, a diver who had come to the Alps for the thrill of exploring its pristine high-altitude lakes. He was skeptical of the local superstitions, seeing them as charming folklore. The money I offered was good, and the challenge of exploring a fully submerged, mid-century village was too tempting for him to resist. "A whole town just sitting down there," he'd said, a grin spreading across his face. "Like a time capsule. It's the urban explorer's dream. Don't worry about the ghost stories. Every old place has them." Our first dive was unsettling. The surface of the lake was a sheet of dark, polished glass, reflecting the jagged peaks of the surrounding mountains with perfect clarity. But the moment we broke the surface, that clarity vanished. The world became a swirling chaos of green and brown, a cold that seeped through my wetsuit and into my bones. We descended through the murky water, our powerful flashlights cutting cones of light into the oppressive gloom. For the first 15 minutes, there was nothing. Just silt, rock, and the occasional ghostly shape of a drowned tree, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of our own breathing, a rhythmic, mechanical rasp that felt alien in this dead world. Then a shape began to resolve itself out of the darkness. It was a wall, a straight, man-made line in a world of natural chaos. As we drifted closer, a window opening appeared, a dark rectangle, gaping into an even darker interior. We followed the wall, and soon the unmistakable silhouette of a pitched roof emerged above us, tilted at a slight, drunken angle. We had found a building. Thibault swam closer and brushed some of the accumulated silt from a sign hanging by a single hinge. The word was simple: chapelle. "It's the chapel," Thibault's voice crackled through my comms unit, the sound tinny and distant. "Old. Look at the windows." I followed his light, and I saw it. The arched windows were filled with stained glass. And, incredibly, impossibly, they were almost perfectly preserved. The colors, deep blues, blood reds, and holy golds, shone with a ghostly luminescence in the beams of our torches. They depicted scenes I couldn't quite make out, figures that seemed to writhe and twist in the warped glass. It was as if the water, the pressure, and the decades of darkness had failed to touch them. The sight was beautiful and deeply, profoundly wrong. We swam through the open doorway. The interior was even more surreal. Pews lay scattered, overturned as if in a panic. A stone font was filled with a dark, swirling silt. But at the far end, before the altar, stood a small table, and on it a single silver plate. It was tarnished but unmistakable, and resting in the center of the plate was something dark, a small pile of what looked like wet soil or ash. It was as if the priest had been interrupted mid-ceremony, as if the entire congregation had simply vanished in an instant. The air in my lungs felt thick, heavy. The silence here was different. It wasn't empty. It was watchful. "Let's go back," Thibault's voice was suddenly tight with urgency. "Something's not right here. I'm getting a bad feeling." I wanted to stay. I wanted to examine the plate, to get a closer look at the stained glass. But he was already turning, his movements brisk and efficient. A part of me, a primal instinct I didn't know I possessed, screamed at me to follow. I kicked off the silty floor and followed him back towards the distant, shimmering ceiling of our world. The next morning, I woke to a strange sound. It was a low, resonant hum, like a single, sustained organ note played at a great distance. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, vibrating through the floorboards of my small hotel room. I went to the window. A thick white fog had rolled in overnight, blanketing the lake and muffling the world in a shroud of silence, save for that persistent, unnerving hum. I found Thibault in the hotel's small cafe. He was sitting alone, staring into a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. His usual, easygoing demeanor was gone, replaced by a pale, haunted look. His hands were trembling. "I'm not going back down," he said quietly, not looking at me. His voice was flat. "Thibault, what is it?" The place was creepy, I get it, but it wasn't just creepy. He cut me off, finally looking up. His eyes were wide with a fear that was chillingly genuine. "I had a dream last night. I dreamt I was still down there, outside the chapel, and something was watching us from inside. From the windows. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Feel it looking at me." He took a shaky breath. And when I woke up, my hands were wet, soaking wet. My hair too, as if I'd just come out of the water. But I never left my room, Martin. I swear it. It was just a nightmare, man, I said, trying to reassure him, and perhaps myself. But deep inside, a cold dread was beginning to bloom. The low hum was still audible, a subtle vibration in the air. I knew he wasn't lying. I had to go back. I couldn't leave it like this. The mystery was no longer just about my grandfather. It was about this place, this feeling of wrongness, this pull it exerted. If Thibault wouldn't go, I would go alone. I dove alone. The second descent was different. The fear was no longer a vague unease. It was a living thing, a presence at my side. The water seemed darker, colder, but I pushed through it. I bypassed the chapel, its stained glass eyes, seeming to follow me as I passed. I swam deeper into the village. I found what must have been the main square. A stone well stood in the center, its dark maw seeming to swallow the light from my torch. Around the square were houses, their doors agape like silent mouths. There were shops with faded signs I could just make out. Boulangerie, librairie, a bakery, a bookshop. I swam towards the bookshop, drawn by the promise of stories, of answers. The inside was a chaotic soup of disintegrated paper and warped wood. But one book, miraculously, was floating in the center of the room, its pages, swollen but intact, held open by the gentle current. I reached out and took it. It was a children's book. On the first page was a drawing, rendered in the simple, earnest style of a child. It depicted a little girl with pigtails, holding the string of a kite that soared high above her. She was smiling. But behind her, looming over the crudely drawn houses of the village, was something else. It was a vast, amorphous shape, a colossal shadow drawn in heavy, angry crayon strokes. It had no features, no definite form, just an overwhelming presence that dominated the page, dwarfing the girl, the kite, and the entire village. A wave of vertigo washed over me. The cold of the water seemed to intensify, pressing in on me from all sides. Where did this drawing come from? How had it survived for 70 years in this state? And why did I feel, with a sudden, heart-stopping certainty, that I was no longer alone in the room? I felt a touch, a distinct, definite pressure on my shoulder, cold, firm, like fingers gripping my wetsuit. My heart hammered against my ribs. I spun around, my light cutting a frantic arc through the darkness. There was nothing there. Nothing but the back wall of the shop. And on it, scraped into the plaster, were words. They weren't old. The marks were fresh, pale against the dark, algae-covered wall. Greater than you should not have come. Greater than panic, pure and absolute, seized me. I dropped the book. I didn't look back. I kicked frantically, desperately, for the surface, for the light, for the air. The ascent was a blur of terror, the sound of my own ragged breathing roaring in my ears. Thibault disappeared that same day. I didn't realize it until evening. After my dive, I had locked myself in my room, trying to process what I had seen. When I finally emerged, the fog had lifted, but the air was still heavy, with a palpable tension. I tried calling Thibault's room. No answer. I went to the front desk. The clerk said he hadn't seen him. Since morning, we went to his room. It was empty. His wallet and phone were on the bedside table. His diving gear was still in the back of his truck. But Thibault was gone. The local gendarme who came to investigate was dismissive. He took my statement with a bored expression, suggesting Thibault had probably just taken off, met a girl, or decided to go hiking. People come and go in these mountains, he said with a shrug, especially people who don't belong. But in Thibault's room, left open, on the desk, was his dive logbook. It was open to a fresh page. On it he had sketched a detailed drawing of the chapel. From memory, the stained glass windows, the altar, the table. And underneath the table, he had drawn something he hadn't mentioned to me, a shape. A dark, rectangular outline on the floor beneath the altar, like a trap door. And below the drawing, a single, hastily scrawled sentence. Greater than what was under the altar. Should never see the light. I'm sorry we touched it. Greater than... I left the next morning. I drove for 12 hours straight, not stopping until the mountains were a distant memory in my rearview mirror. But I knew, with a sickening certainty, that I hadn't left Willensdorf behind. I returned home, but home was no longer a sanctuary. The silence of my apartment felt different now, imbued with the same watchful quality as the water in that lake. At night, I had nightmares, not just fleeting images, but vivid, full-sensory experiences. I would dream I was standing on the bottom of the lake, in the main square of Willensdorf. The water wasn't there, but the pressure was, a crushing weight on my chest. The buildings were whole, the signs were fresh, and there were people, shadowy figures moving. Just at the edge of my vision, their faces always turned away, and I would hear a voice, a chorus of whispers that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the village, a soft, sibilant sound that said over and over again, "You will come back. You are part of the story now." I tried to forget. I tried to bury the memory, to dismiss it as a combination of nitrogen narcosis and an overactive imagination. I threw myself into my work, taking on mundane projects, anything to occupy my mind. But the village wouldn't let me go. A week after I returned, the first letter arrived. A plain white envelope, no return address. A postmark from a city I'd never been to. Inside, a single sheet of paper. The same kind of old, yellowed paper as my grandfather's letter. On it, 2 words, typed in an old-fashioned font. Greater than Willens, DORF remembers. Greater than. They came every week after that. Always a different postmark. Always the same message. Sometimes the message would change. The girl with the kite is waiting. The well is deep. The altar is empty now. Each one was a cold spike of fear in my heart, a reminder that what I had experienced was real. My apartment grew cold. A faint, damp smell, the smell of lake, water and decay clung to my clothes. I would catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, a tall, shadowy figure, standing in a doorway, gone. When I turned to look, the low, resonant hum I'd heard at the lake would sometimes return, a faint vibration I could feel in my teeth. I don't know what we found in that water. I don't know what happened to Thibault or to my grandfather's mysterious friend, A.E., Perhaps Willensdorf isn't a village at all, but a trap, a lure for the curious, a place that feeds on attention, that hooks itself into you and never lets go. Perhaps it wasn't forgotten by accident. Perhaps it was quarantined. But I know one thing for certain. The moment you learn about Willensdorf, it learns about you. So now I'm asking you, what was this thing? Have any of you ever heard a similar story, a legend of a place that remembers? Is this some ancient curse, a haunting on a massive scale? Or is it something else, something from the depths of the human subconscious, a fear that takes the shape of a town and pulls you under? Write your theories, your ideas, your own stories in the comments below. I'll be reading every single one. And if you want to follow this journey to its conclusion, whatever it may be, subscribe to the channel, because I have a feeling this is just the beginning. We're going deeper. Now,